Beneath this mask, there is more than flesh. Beneath this mask, there is an idea, Mr. Creedy. And ideas are bulletproof.
Hey Subfuries, V for Vendetta, directed by James McTeague, is one of those rare films that relies on historical allusions, symbols, and philosophy in each and every one of its moments. The film culminates with a revolution against the tyrannical Norse fire regime, people marching in the streets, and the Houses of Parliament being razed to the ground. But Alan Moore's story offers a more complex question about politics, the people, and power. When is revolution truly justified? What justifies the power of the government, and when can you, the individual, take up arms against them? From the first scene of the film, we see the dictatorial framework of Chancellor Sutler's Britain. After a history of biological disaster, warfare, starvation, and drought, a new society arose.
And where once you had the freedom to object, to think and speak as you saw fit, you now have censors and systems of surveillance coercing your conformity and submitting your submission.
We need cameras.
There are civilian curfews, extreme search and seizure methods, and surveillance at every level of society. When describing how Chancellor Sutler's regime justified these extreme measures of power in the first act, V explains,
Fear got the best of you, and in your panic you turned to the now High Chancellor Adam Sutler. He promised you order, he promised you peace, and all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent.
The wording here is purposeful. McTeague chose the twin ideas of fear and consent to recall the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century political philosopher. To put it extremely simply, in his famous work Leviathan, Hobbes talked about what justifies government power. He argued two things. Firstly, that government power is justified by consent. You have to consent to your government having power over you. Secondly, that it is human nature to fear death above all else. He believed that if you do not have a government, not even your life can be guaranteed against those around you, because humans will eventually kill each other for resources, land, or wife. And if we're so focused on staying alive and afraid of those around us, then freedom of speech, religion, action, and assembly are simply not guaranteed, or even possible. V alludes to this sentiment in his revolutionary speech.
I know why you did it. I know you were afraid. Who wouldn't be? War, terror, disease. There were a myriad of problems which conspired to corrupt your reason and rob you of your common sense.
Imagine a classroom without a teacher. Johnny has 3 pencils and knows Mikey will not take them because the teacher would punish Mikey if he tried to. But if the teacher leaves, then nothing is to stop Mikey from beating Johnny up and taking his pencil if he needs it. A classroom without a teacher is like living without government to Hobbes, and he calls such a situation the state of nature. If this is what it's like without government, then we can see how Sutler's Norse fire regime justifies its power. Any government that can provide peace, order, stability, and relieve us of that constant fear for our lives must be necessarily better than the state of nature, no matter how oppressive it may be. Under this philosophy, Sutler's government is justified because A, the people voted him into power, and B, his regime brought people out of the state of nature by relieving them of that constant fear of death. To Hobbes, these are the only 2 requirements. Fundamentally, fear of death is the governing principle of human action in Hobbes' philosophy. When considering V's eventual revolution in this light, if the idea of having no state means falling into such utter chaos that one is terrified for their life, that they cannot have meaningful relationships, that they're in a constant state of war, then no such revolution as V's can ever be justified. Chancellor Sutler says as much.
Doubt will plunge this country back into chaos, and I will not let that happen. The security of this nation depends on complete and total compliance.
To him, the risk is too high. No matter what liberties V fights for, Sutler's government is supposedly legitimate because it provides for the most base human concern, security of life, where the state of nature cannot. But V for Vendetta directly challenges the assumptions underpinning this model of political legitimacy. McTeague challenges the idea that fear has to be the governing principle of human nature. After Evie steps in to save V at the BTN, she begins to panic and questions why she did so.
I maced that detective. Why'd I do that?
You did what you thought was right.
I must have been out of my mind.
Or is that what you really think, or is that what they'd want you to think?
In this scene, Evie acted on instinct, or human nature, but she didn't take the course of action that would be motivated by fear of death. After all, attacking a cop could get her killed. She instead took action for a reason she can't quite specify. It is here that the film first offers that something other than fear of death can be closer to the heart of human nature, and the rest of the movie centers largely around Evie's transition from fearful to fearless.
You said you wanted to live without fear. In that cell you found something that mattered more to you in life. Because when they threatened to kill you unless you gave them what they wanted, you told them you'd rather die. You faced your death, Evie.
The film reaches its climax when the populace goes through much the same transformation as Evie, from fearful to fearless. Faced with armed men, they march on Parliament in hopes of pursuing something more fundamental than just their life. This being the case, McTeague offers the audience a question. What is left to justify the government's power? A government supposedly becomes legitimate because it can ensure the protection of the most base and instinctual human concern, the thing at the bottom of the pyramid that all of the things on top of it rely on. Hobbes thought that this was security of life, but the film posits that people can put liberal rights and ideas before self-preservation. If this is so, then Sutler's regime no longer protects the most fundamental principle, and the High Chancellor's authority lacks basis. The bottom of the pyramid is lost, and all the rest with it. Under this model of thought, V's revolution becomes justified because the state of nature has become preferable to having the state. This is because fear of death is no longer the governing principle of human action. It is liberty. There is the opportunity for freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom of religion in the state of nature, even if there is no longer order or protection of life. But that doesn't matter, because these liberal ideas have replaced security of life at the bottom of the pyramid. But V's revolution is still not wholly justified, because we're left with a bit of an odd situation. If whether things like freedom of speech and action are protected by the government can determine when a revolution becomes justified, at what point does this right of revolution truly kick in? Can you, the ordinary citizen, for example, start blowing up the Empire State Building because you don't believe the government has the right to give you a parking ticket? I mean, it depends on the parking. No, but really. The obvious issue is that if we let every individual person in society decide whether the government is acting legitimately, then it'll lead to an unending series of tiny rebellions and social instability, and we're back to square one. It is in the third act of the movie that V directly addresses this philosophical issue.
And it's really going to happen, isn't it?
It will if you want it to. And the truth is, you made me understand that I was wrong. That the choice to pull this lever is not mine to make. Tomorrow a different world will begin that different people will shape. And this choice belongs to them.
Throughout the movie, we come to see that V is not just motivated by the justice and these higher ideas that he talks about, but by anger and revenge against those who wronged him. In Pauline Meyer's study, From Resistance to Revolution, she wrote, private individuals were forbidden to take force against their rulers because of private injuries. Not just a few individuals, but the body of the people had to feel concerned before the right of revolution was justified, indicating a broad consensus involving all ranks of society. V acknowledges that merely personal grievances against the Norse fire regime do not justify revolution. Galvanizing the population was originally a practical thing for the success of his plan, but it later became clear it was also what gave it legitimacy. Evie Hammond, being the representative of the British public undergoing a change of heart at the same time she was, had to be the one to pull the lever. A symbolic act that changed razing Parliament to the ground from a personal terrorist act of V's grievance to a principled and justified revolution. It is a collective right, not an individual. So if you're planning to overthrow your government, how do you justify a revolution? V for Vendetta asserts that it is not human nature to place fear of death above all else, but that humans are capable of desiring personal integrity and liberty more. If these things are more important to us than self-preservation, a government that protects the latter, but not the former, becomes illegitimate. This is because life in the state of nature without a government has become preferable to that with a government. However, this is not an individual right to rebel, but a collective one that requires the people to prefer it with some consensus. V's revolution was not won on any battlefield, but in the hearts of men. A legitimate revolution requires each and every individual to say,
Vive la Revolution.
Wow, that was something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and after I made my first video essay on Zahir's philosophy from Avatar, and if you haven't watched that, please go check it out, I had such a really positive response. Like, all the comments, it just made me so happy, so I really wanted to make another one, even though it terrifies me when I make these, because I'm always afraid I'm going to get it horribly wrong. But if you enjoyed it, please support me with a like and let me know what you thought of the essay down in the comments below. So V is traditionally renowned as the paragon of the chaotic good character. So my question for you today is, what alignment are you? Lawful good, chaotic evil, true neutral? Let me know down in the comments below. If this video looks a little bit weird, it's because it is my very first time ever using my new GoPro. I figured that now that I have like 62,000 subscribers and I've made over 140 videos, it was about time for me to stop using this $150 camera and get me something a little bit better. I got a new camera, a new tripod, and I use this new microphone, and I've been teaching myself how to use audio editing software, so hopefully this video sounded better than my previous one. V for Vendetta has always held a special place in cinematic history for me, not because the story of it is particularly unique. You know, the idea of a masked man going on a vengeful, justified quest against a tyrannical government or whatever isn't a particularly new one, but it is full of meaning and symbols and philosophy, and as someone who loves analysing and learning about that sort of thing, it holds a special place in my heart. In the meantime, if you liked my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and then come follow me on Twitter, Wattpad, Facebook, email me stuff that you've made, or send me stuff from the address and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, Sub Furies, and I'll see you in the future.